Its programs and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution.radio, where freedom never sleeps. I am Diamond from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, and this is my lovely co-host, Leah Shaper. Look at that hair.
Oh, well.
We got a great show today. We're going to be talking first half about the strongest solar flare of this solar cycle, cycle 25. And some of the mishmash that's in the media. This may, in fact, have been the largest solar radio event ever recorded, which is, it's not the flare. It's the effect on the surface from the flare immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think people get that. So we'll go over that.
Right.
It caused a massive blackout, and for hours, some communications were completely eliminated.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. Second half of this show, we're going to talk about a very controversial site outside of Pueblo, Mexico, called Hueyatlaco.
I think it's Puebla, not Pueblo.
Okay, Puebla.
It's easy for us to say Pueblo because we have a Pueblo nearby.
Probably why I said it.
Yeah.
So Hueyatlaco back in the 70s was a very controversial site. They were using some type of very specific type of dating, zircon dating, which is pretty accurate, with a wide range of error. And they were getting ridiculous dates of hundreds of thousands of years old for these occupation layers. Now, these are layers that have bones and associated tools. So completely mind-blowing. And then most people just, said that they're crazy and threw it out of the water. And so we'll get into that. Did you have a chance to look at any of that?
I scanned some of it. I wish I was better informed on this particular topic.
Yeah, it looks so interesting that we may take a whole hour to discuss it.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the solar flare, shall we?
Yes.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, I can.
So this is the flare in question. It was an X flare. It wasn't
and you can see why from that image, why those are called X flares.
Yeah, I guess, or asterisk flares. Now, this X flare wasn't particularly a strong flare. It, in fact, on the list of all flares that have ever been recorded in human history, falls in. Can you fathom a guess on where it falls in the top 1,000 or whatever?
Oh, I'd say it's pretty low. I would imagine.
47th.
47. Oh, not as low as I thought.
Yeah. So it is the 47th. It actually made the top 50 solar flare list. I think it's 47th. Let's come down here. Nope, it is 43rd.
Oh.
The X2.87 is the 43rd largest X flare ever recorded. Now, this is interesting. All the stronger X flares ever recorded have happened very recently, within the last 2 decades. And take a look at the largest, X2.8 plus, back in 2003.
Yeah.
Clearly, that wasn't Earth-facing, or we wouldn't be having this discussion.
Also, I mean, what I don't really know. What's the earliest date where we're actually accurately recording these flare sizes? Like, when did we start doing this?
Probably in the 80s or 90s. The data came pretty good.
Yeah.
So X flares happen a lot if we only have 4 decades of data.
Right.
Yeah, they happen all the time. In fact, multiple X flares happen every single solar cycle.
Sure.
I don't think there's a solar cycle we know of that doesn't have X flares associated with it.
Sure. It's just a question of what direction is it headed? Is it Earth facing or not?
Right. And the one that just happened, good news, is not Earth facing. It's going to clip us. But let's talk about it. It was the strongest solar flare of the cycle. And it was likely the largest solar radio event ever recorded. So what does that mean for you and I? It means that X flares that aren't that strong right now are affecting the Earth in the strongest possible way.
Right.
So if this was an X2.8, like back in 2003, what would have happened? What kind of blackout would we see?
I mean, at that level of X flare, I don't. Right, we're saying that this particular flare, which was what X2.8, it has a extremely sizable effect on Earth specifically because our magnetosphere is really weak. Something that's like an X28, I mean, it's not even going to matter that much how strong our magnetosphere is.
So this plasmasphere 93 million miles away has this shock on the surface here, this X flare, and almost instantly on Earth, there is a radio blackout. And the one we just had, they're calling a cataclysmic starburst, which generated massive amounts of radiation and caused a massive radio blackout in South America, which subsequently led to the disruption and even complete loss of radio signals for several hours.
It's interesting how they talk about this as if it's like a new phenomena or something. Like they even gave it a dramatic sounding name. And it's like, this has been happening for as long as the sun has existed. What are they talking about?
True. But in this case, it's the strongest ever recorded.
Yeah, yeah.
So that means that if there's a larger X flare, we could have sections of the Earth in communication blackout for maybe half a day.
Sure.
And that would be very bad when it comes to logistics. Like, let's say a foreign entity wanted to come and attack you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be a really good opportunity.
I was even reading somewhere that, in some cases with a Earth direct, I mean, this is Earth facing. It's just not head on, right? It kind of goes off to the side. But even with other Earth facing flares, there's the propensity to actually like push satellites around and stuff, which is interesting because obviously that would cause other chaos.
Or fry them. Yeah, I'm going to pull up here the WSA Enlil solar wind prediction. This was updated yesterday. Finally, it took forever for them to get this X flare on. And what you'll see is an M flare come off, the X flare cannibalize it, another flare on top of that, and that's all going to be hitting us in just about 12 hours. It'll
all
be hitting
at the same time.
Yeah, because of the speed of the X flare, it'll capture everything and it'll arrive first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the good news is we're not in the thick of it. We're getting just the edge basically, but still it'll have an effect.
Yeah, and the forecast is for extended periods of G2 geomagnetic storm.
Yeah.
So that's just KP6. Now they can be wrong. They can be wrong from what we just saw. If it is the largest radio blackout on the surface, who knows if they're correct here?
I mean, didn't we have a G7 or G8 geomagnetic storm recently?
Yeah, maybe a month ago.
I would imagine this is
going to be slightly unexpected.
Yeah.
So what happens is all the pieces in the puzzle have to be correct. The magnetic field on Earth has to be facing the right direction to create the geomagnetic storm. Sometimes the field is opposite and cancels out the effect.
Sure.
And then it's like, oh.
But because we vote for destruction on Earth, apparently.
Yeah, so this is also falling at a great time overnight for us in North America. So we could be seeing some sick auroras. Let's check out the aurora forecast. So pretty weak right now. And that's because telemetry hasn't changed. Now here's another piece of the puzzle is where are we with the telemetry when it hits? So a small CME passed around 24 hours ago. You can see a jump in everything here. That was probably an M flare from 3 days ago. And we are now sitting with high density and the speed was at 500, but it's now dropping. So it's still elevated. So if this gets a 200 kilometer per hour push, it will push it up to around 700 kilometers per second. That could be G3 range.
Sure.
So that's what we're talking about here. Now, radio communications were degraded in multiple countries. You can see from the picture here where the highest impact was almost all of South America and Mexico. So this was a pretty big blackout.
Yeah.
I wonder what the people on the ground were thinking.
Yeah.
Wonder if the internet was out or what was going on there. Like that news is not coming to us.
Well, and generally when stuff like that happens, I mean, you don't get this background information about what's actually causing it, Like we have these like weird periodic sort of communication blackouts in Pagosa, which are usually a function of the major telecommunications company, but something like that could also be a function of what's happening with the sun, and it's not going to be reported.
Right.
Generally speaking.
So for the next year at least, we will be in the window for X flares because we'll be at the peak of solar cycle 25.
Right. With a weak magnetosphere.
And weakening.
Yeah.
One thing we can do for those that are going to watch later tonight on Magnetic Reversal News at 8 p.m. is we can show you the X flare happening and the position it was as it turned around the limb. Now, what do I mean by that? It's the Earth facing quiet is real.
Mm-hmm.
So these sunspots traverse the entire Earth facing section. And then when they get to the edge, then they flare.
Right.
Almost as if they're scared to flare at us.
They're very. It's a very polite sun. It's really trying not to fart at us.
But in the case of these big flares, you can see here, this is what they call halo. Halo. And what that means is that, let's pause it. When it comes out, it comes all around from the perspective of the Earth, the ejecta, which means some of it is headed towards us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is ejecta headed towards us. Let's see, look at the halo here. Wait for it. Boom. And so you can see it push out in almost every direction.
Mm-hmm.
So we got a halo coronal mass ejection headed our way. X2.8 CME with G2 moderate geomagnetic storm could be lasting for 9 hours.
I'm surprised that the aurora forecast is not showing more. That seems strange, doesn't it?
Well, because it's so fast moving, it's an X flare, and the cannibalization of it, it's going to be a fast event because it sweeps everything up in its path, and it's just going to be a quick in and out.
Right, right.
We usually have reverberations from those events.
Mm-hmm.
And they have it so because it's only G2 geomagnetic storm, they have it going to KP4 for the next day.
Okay.
For like hours the next day. See? So if this is higher, then we could see KP5 for the whole next day. If this gets up to KP7, it could be a whole different event.
I don't like KP4 and 5. It makes me feel weird. I like KP7 a lot better.
Right. So this geomagnetic storm will not be significant for any infrastructure on Earth. It's not a Carrington event. We're not going to fry the grid here. It will be pretty aurora. And because the magnetosphere is weakening, we're going to be seeing aurora in very low latitudes. Like every geomagnetic storm we've had this year, there's been aurora in Arizona. Like that is unheard of.
Right, right, right.
Now, the interesting thing is that a lot of the headlines are completely incorrect. Like this one. This is from earth.com. It says the strongest solar flare ever recorded.
That's absolutely wrong.
So stupid. And they're fear-mongering here. It's going to cause blackouts. KP7 typically doesn't cause blackouts.
I struggle to understand why media outlets publish like this. I guess it's just a momentary sensationalism that brings people to their site and raises, essentially creates revenue that way. But it's at the end of the day, it really undermines your publication because, everybody will discover that you're completely wrong here. This is totally false. This is not going to cause blackouts. Auroras, sure. But
how many people are going to actually realize that? Everyone that watches the show.
Right, right.
Let's talk brass tacks here. Here's the reality. The top 50 geomagnetic storms were crazy. Back in 2003, look at this, KP9 for like 24 hours.
Oh, wow.
Now, a lot of this is bad for people with bad tickers. And people stroke out KP8 and higher often. Friends that are in the electric universe, John Casey had a stroke during a geomagnetic storm that got to KP9.
Mm-hmm.
Dave Talbot had a stroke during a geomagnetic storm that was up at KP8. Mm-hmm. So this is real, and we know people that are affected. So and now we've got all these Jaboriginals out, the people with the the thing.
Yeah.
Wow. So any strong geomagnetic storm is probably pretty bad.
Well, I think what people often forget, right, is that we are electromagnetic human beings, right? Like that is part of our biology. And so, of course, we're affected by events like this. The degree, of course, depends on the event itself and then our general health as well.
Yeah, so here, recent in this solar cycle right here, the 26th strongest geomagnetic storm happened in April 23rd. We only got to KP8 for 9 hours of the whole thing.
I'm sorry, I can't really see that. Is that this year?
Yeah, April 23rd, 2023.
Yeah.
So we can go higher. We can see one of these KP9, these massive storms. We still have another year of this solar cycle, and the magnetosphere is, let's say, cooperating by getting weaker. Weaker solar storms will create higher geomagnetic storms on Earth. Does that make sense?
Repeat that. Say that again.
The KP index is an arbitrary index of the effects of a solar storm when it hits Earth. You know, and so because our magnetosphere is weak, that means that smaller solar flares with CMEs create bigger solar storms on Earth.
Sure.
Which is bad news for the grid.
Right.
Because when a real X-23 Earth facing is shooting at us, it's going to be bad news.
Well, because effectively KP is a measure of instability, right? So the higher the number, the more unstable the electromagnetic dynamic is. And so any small rift, like this X flare, which is only 2.8 and not fully Earth facing, is going to have a bigger effect than it might at another time when the magnetosphere is stronger.
Yeah. So, and this isn't like new. So just to get your picture here, look at the top 20 geomagnetic storms were all in the most of them, 90% in the last two solar cycles.
Yeah.
2003 tops the list with the top 2. And then the number 3 was in 2000, number 4, 2001, number 5, 2004. So this is all the same solar cycle where all the top 5 geomagnetic storms ever recorded occurred. So you can get an idea that the chances of this happening are very high.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the weaker our magnetic field gets, the worse it will be.
Right. Well, and then of course the difference there too is 2003 or whatever, we would be in a solar maximum about that time as well.
Yeah.
But the difference is that we're now in a solar maximum within a larger, essentially minimum, like grand minimum, right? So there's where the weaker magnetosphere comes into play versus what would have been happening in 2001, 2003.
Right. So two consecutive solar cycles under 150 sunspots are the lowest in over 100 years. So that is, and we haven't been studying this that long. So we really don't know what 2 week solar cycles does.
Right. Yes.
So
that's
therein
another
lies
really
the
important
problem.
Consideration here.
The good news is that we have all of the resources at our fingertips to monitor it and to see what's happening.
Yes.
So it's not like we're going to be in the dark. So my call is for KP, 6 or 7, probably around midnight, maybe even during the replay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we've got 9 more minutes. Well, actually 8 until the break. I don't know if you saw this. This is pretty interesting. Early risers may have inherited a faster body clock from Neanderthals. So some people don't like to get up early in the morning. You're obviously not Neanderthal.
That's what I was about to say. I'm not a morning person in any way, shape, or form.
And I am kind of a Viking, so I think I have the Neanderthal blood. I love getting up early.
Yeah.
I can get up and immediately just go. Some people get up and they need an hour to even wake up. I'm just going.
That's me. It takes me an hour to wake up with coffee.
So early risers may have inherited genetic variants from Neanderthals that increase their odds of being morning rather than evening people, according to a new research. And I wonder if that has to do with the fight or flight. Maybe your genetics has gotten lazy due to all this materialism and comforts that we have. And I got a little bit of the Neanderthal psychogenetics, which is as soon as you wake up, something's trying to eat you or something, and you got to be ready to go.
Well, I mean, what's weird about that is that I'm much more susceptible to fight or flight responses than you are. So I'm a much more anxious person, I think, than you are. So I don't know if we're good case examples for studying this particularly, but
interesting. All this will be linked below, so you can go check out the paper. You just click on here, Genome of Biology and Evolution, and you get that paper. Well, actually, let's take a look what the title is. Of course.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really I'm really curious to know how you link this to a genetically passed on trait. Like what genes are they looking at?
Archaic introgression shaped human circadian traits.
I have no idea what that means.
Yeah. Well, if that's your cup of tea, go get it, especially if you're a morning person.
Yeah.
Now, as we go to break, this is interesting. A new paper coming out showing that the Sahara Desert used to be green savanna. And new research explains why. They did a paleo geographic reconstruction of this area going back 250,000 years, and it's fascinating. The Sahara Desert is not the normal state of northern Africa. Mm-hmm. It is an outlier. North Africa is typically wet and green. If you go back 126,000 years ago, it was wet and green. West Africa, Northwest Africa, and Central Africa. And just 9,000 years ago, and the period of when Egypt was at its peak, it was also green. One of the largest inland lakes was there, Lake Chad, which is now subsequently tiny because it's dried up since then. It's now, today, the Sahara Desert. Now, what's interesting in this paper is that the continent of Africa has been above sea level for 126,000 years. Now, that is some pretty bold, good evidence to state, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, that the Reshat structure is not Atlantis. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I was just thinking that, obviously this would be supported by evidence that shows up, such as what Robert Schoch pointed out, that the Sphinx is clearly heavily eroded by water, not by wind or sand. So there has to be a period of time where you have a lot of rainfall happening in this part of the world.
What's interesting in these paleo geographic reconstructions that we're looking at, take a look. The area where Egypt would be is never wet.
I was noticing that, and I'm like, that's very interesting in and of itself, that area is desert. So that's confusing.
Well, it may or may not be. All the drainages go up here. So if all this is wet, you're going to have these massive flooding rivers coming through this desert here. It's a very weird scenario, right?
Right.
The Tigris and the Euphrates.
But that doesn't necessarily lead to precipitation, which is what you would need to erode the Sphinx the way it appears to have eroded.
No, it leads to flooding. And the Sphinx enclosure, the Nile, 4,000 years ago, was right next to the Sphinx enclosure.
Okay. Yeah.
So if you have these massive rains coming from hundreds of miles away and the Nile rises, and like the Mississippi in, I don't remember when it was, 1997, I was out there doing a photo essay for a geology project. The Mississippi flooded so much, it went to 60 to 90 miles wide in Davenport.
Wow.
Which usually is only a half a mile wide.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those types of floods would have been happening on the Nile only because it was this wet back then.
Right.
And so that could be where that catastrophic erosion, if the Nile floods and pours into the Sphinx enclosure, it's going to create that type of weathering.
Right. Interesting.
So that could be what was happening.
Right.
Robert, if you want to talk about this, just leave a link below.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, so it also goes back to this problem that we have in science, generally speaking, right? When we're talking about, let's say, Earth, we assume that everything is as it always was, which is clearly not the case. I mean, climate changes in a specific way and in a grander way, right? So we should not assume that any area that is currently a desert was always a desert. That doesn't make sense. The Earth is not stable and normalized all the time.
Right. And if you look at the Holocene temperature record, it appears to be stable from a distance, but it is in fact highly variable on a millennial scale. So, we'll be right back to talk about a fascinating site, Hueyatlaco.
Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
owns you. If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine.
There was blood on the wire.
Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons. There are...
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
The Secret Kindergarten is here for the young children of the world. The best program on the radio for kids, dealing with the most important topics in the whole universe. Fairy tales, music and movement, numbers, plants, animals, fun, colors, insects. Take care and cast your ears out to catch a story from the world of other young things. Reach out, up, under, and over. Sing a song. Talk about feelings. Just remember the magic word. The magic word is no. Step on into the Secret Kindergarten. Saturdays, 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Revolution Radio.
Interrupt your normally scheduled programming to bring you this important broadcasting announcement.
Now is the time to explore your greatest potential, embracing truth, health, and wellness while discarding the system and exposing its corruption. Experience true freedom every Saturday night between 6 and 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, live from Studio B. It's the Jonathan Wright Show.
Find it right here at revolution.radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
Join me on the Brian Rouge Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the four most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. Number one is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. Number two is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. Number three, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. Number four is advanced ancient global civilizations. Join me on the Brian Rouge Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at buyer risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And we're back with the second half of Cosmic Catastrophe on revolution.radio, freedomslips.com. If you support free speech, become a Patreon over at revolution.radio for as little as $1 a month. You can, if you like this show and you're a regular listener, let's say, maybe consider a donation. So do you have any follow-up thoughts on what we talked about in the first half?
Not at the moment, no.
All right, well, let's go on to Hueyatlaco. I hadn't really heard of it until someone emailed me about it. And then I remembered in the past reading about it decades ago.
Yeah.
And I, like others, were like, yeah, that's probably bad information. Because you got to remember, let's say 15, 20 years ago, if you were a mainstream archaeologist or paleontologist, you had to believe that hominids only arrived in North America within the last 13,000 years. The oldest they put it was 13,400 or something with the arrival of the Clovis. And prior to that, there was no one in North or South America, which is completely insane.
I agree.
Because we have evidence for hominids all around the world going back millions of years. So why wouldn't they be here?
Right. That's the question I've always asked, is why make the assumption that hominids were not here? Like, that's the bizarre part to me. You should not start with that assumption. You should start with the assumption that anything is possible, right?
Especially if you're finding things that are millions of years old in caves in Europe or whatever. There's probably hominids all over.
Right.
And it's very difficult to preserve human bones. There is very limited. Think about how many millions of humans have died. Do you know how many human skeletons we have that are fossilized? Just a handful.
Right, which is crazy, right? Because I mean, there's 8 billion people on the planet right now, right? So there's got to be, I don't even know what the correct numeral term would be, hundreds of billions of skeletons on the Earth, and we only have a handful, and we think we understand human evolution on Earth. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah. I think we got like one person from 9,000 years ago in the entire continent, and he recently like melted out of ice. So there's only one fully articulated skeleton. Only one. The rest are like a fragment of a jaw, a finger bone, where they extrapolate a whole new species.
Right.
So let's talk about Hueyatlaco. And the unfortunate thing happened here is that this discovery was made far too early. Because they didn't have any evidence of anyone at all, like prior to 10,000 years ago. We were pretty dumb back then. And so this site comes back with this amazing dating, and it becomes very controversial.
Well, the other problem here is just from, reading this paper, like it looks like a lot of the evidence has been lost or messed with too. So that's another problem. And a lot of stuff wasn't published,
So here's the general. Hueyatlaco is an archaeological site in the Vasquillo Basin near the city of Puebla, Mexico. After excavations in the 60s, the site became notorious due to geochronologists' analysis that indicated human habitation at Hueyatlaco dated to 25,000 years before present. Now, go ahead.
I'm a little confused about this. So I saw this 25,000 year number being thrown around, and then I'm starting to see 250,000 years before present.
Yeah, so this is the wiki we're reading here.
Yeah. So this is like the extremely conservative version of what's going on at this site.
Yeah. But even if we're just going to say that they found 25,000 years before present habitation, that was still not acceptable.
Right, because supposedly the earliest habitation here was like 16,000 years ago.
Right. And now we have evidence in White Sands that people were walking around there at this time. At the same time, 20,000 years ago, people in New Mexico, why wouldn't they be in Mexico?
Right.
So let's get to the dating. By mid-1969, Szabo, Mald, and Irwin Williams published their first paper about dating at the excavation site. The stone tools were discovered in situ, in stratum that also contain animal remains. Now, what that means is that this is a depositional layer that hasn't been reworked by wind or water. They were laying in concert with each other. When you have tools next to butchered bones, it's pretty good evidence that they were associated.
Well, here's a question about that, because I see that part of the controversy here is that some people have suggested that perhaps that this was affected by water, that there's water channels here that caused mixing of those strata.
Yeah, we'll get to the stratigraphy because it's really good.
Yeah.
I have the paper and the figures are really good. So the stone tools were found in an area which contained animal remains, and then they radiocarbon dated it. They radiocarbon dated the animal remains, which produced an age of 35,000 years before present. Uranium dating produced an age of 260,000 years before present, plus or minus 60.
That's a very big difference.
Right. And the authors then stated they had no definitive explanation for the anomalous results. However, Mauld suggested the tool-bearing strata had possibly been eroded by an ancient stream bed, thus combining older and newer strata and complicating the dating.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, you got really old dates. Oh, man.
I mean, yes, really old dates, but obviously that's a huge discrepancy, so it needs to be pared down a bit.
Okay, so obviously, like any good science, in 1973, following these weird dates, Virginia, Steen, McIntyre, Mauld, and Frexwell returned to Hueyatlaco to re-examine the geographic strata and more accurately determine the age of the tool-bearing strata. They were able to rule out Mauld's stream bed scouring hypothesis. So that probably didn't happen. Moreover, the team undertook an exhaustive analysis of volcanic ash and pumice from the original excavation site and the surrounding region. Using zircon fission track dating, geochemist C.W. Nasser dated samples from ash at Hueyatlaco's tool-bearing strata to, wait for it, 370,000 years before present, plus or minus 240,000. That is a huge...
Right. I mean, that's a huge window, but also what a date. And then, I mean, I guess you would assume from this, because this settlement is sitting on a pumice layer, correct?
Yeah. So the stratigraphy is very specific. And the stratigraphy that they did is fantastic. So you know that the things that they're finding down in these layers are in place. And oftentimes they are shrouded. So if you're on a surface and you could find a pumice layer right on top of it and date it, you know that that surface is at least that old.
Yeah.
And so that's what the new stratigraphy did. And they got these ridiculously old dates.
Yeah.
Which is not odd at this point, because there were discoveries in the last year or so in California, I believe in La Brea, those tar pits or that region, where they found tools and animals that date hundreds of thousands of years ago. I think 320.
Yeah.
And at the same, and obviously scientists are like, nah, because they just, I don't understand what the holdup is by pushing back these dates and saying there were hominids in North America 300,000 years ago.
Right.
What's the problem?
Well, it makes me think of that paper that we reviewed a couple months ago about the wooden structure that's, what is it, 250,000 years? I can't even remember what the date
Maybe
is.
270, it's old.
275, something like that. And it's like that alone, I mean, it challenges the entire narrative, right? It suggests that on some level we were in place rather than being wandering hunter-gatherers all the time. But even if we were still wandering hunter-gatherers, that at the very least that we had a schedule, right? We had a place where we came back to. Otherwise, why would you build a wooden structure here? And it's like that evidence like that pops up that makes it quite obvious that the official archaeological and paleontological narrative, as far as hominids is concerned, doesn't make any sense. But yet,
I mean,
we can, we get to these conclusions and people go, oh, that's hogwash, even though the evidence is right in front of your face.
Right. So it could be that a species of hominid like Homo erectus was very advanced and built wood structures and lived in houses. The odds of a 300,000-year-old wooden structure surviving is zero.
Right.
I mean, it's absolutely zero.
It was
the
just by
fact that they
chance.
found one submerged like that is amazing. Well, it also says there's probably were lots of them.
Well, that's what I was about to say. I mean, if it's there, it's just by chance that that one got preserved because of the specific environment, and there was water involved that helped preserve the wood, et cetera, et cetera. So how many more of those were there? It's the same question as the, only finding one 9,000-year-old intact human skeleton in the New World. Right? It's the same thing. It's like, just because you only found one doesn't mean it didn't happen. It doesn't mean that there weren't more, and there probably were.
And then we won't even get to it. It's the elongated skulls and Paracas.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So guess what happens after they come up with this? They redate it. They do the stratigraphy good. And the confirmation of this anomalously distant age for human habitation at the Hueyatlaco site led to tension between the scientists.
Oh, what do you know?
So
I can't accept your conclusion emotionally.
Mauld and Fryexel announced the findings at the Geologic Society of America meeting, admitting they could not account for the anomalous results. Irwin and Williams responded by describing their announcement as irresponsible, given the substantial margin of error for the fission track findings, and then new method of uranium dating. Irwin Williams asserted that Hueyatlaco had not been accurately dated to her satisfaction.
I mean, yeah, granted, a margin of error of 240,000 years on 370,000 years is pretty bad. That's not very helpful.
No. So for the next several years, the excavation team were at odds as they discussed how to move forward with the findings. And Mauld, Steen, and McIntyre argued that the 200,000 year before present findings were valid, while Irwin and Williams argued in favor of a more recent, though still somewhat controversial figure of 20,000, suggesting that her promoting the 20,000 years before present date is particularly puzzling, as it was unsupported by any evidence from any of the dating.
Yeah, but it's easier to swallow, so,
It's almost like they just took the age of the universe and doubled it because we got a better telescope.
Yeah.
In this case, they're making it less than farther away so that everyone believes them.
It's funny because it brings to mind the phrase "facts don't care about your feelings." It's like you need to just look at the facts, not how you feel about how that fits into the accepted narrative.
Right. So you would expect as we get closer to the present, there's going to be more dating here and there'll be more confirmations. In fact, in 1981, the journal Coordinary Research published a paper by Steen, McIntyre, Frixwell, and Mauld that defended the anomalously distant age for human habitation. The paper reported the results of 4 sophisticated independent tests, including uranium-thorium, fission track dating, and tetrahydration dating, and the studying of the mineral weathering to determine the date of the artifacts. Now, these tests, among other, validated a date of 250,000 years before present. And this is what they wrote in the paper. The evidence outlined here consistently indicates that Hueyatlaco site is 250,000 years old. We who have worked on the geological aspects of the Vallasqueo area are painfully aware that so great an age poses an archaeological dilemma. In our view, the results reported here widen the window of time in which serious investigation of the age of man in the New World would be warranted. We will continue to cast a critical eye on all the data, including our own. That's bone-chilling.
That's a wonderfully stated paragraph of the situation, I think.
And it leads back to our facts don't care about your feelings.
Yeah, exactly.
Again, science is not about consensus here. So
no.
And then comes the aftermath. In a letter to Coordinary Research, Irwin and Williams objected to several points in the article by Steele and McIntyre. Steen McIntyre's claims that some of the original research team were harassed, viewed as incompetent or saw their careers hampered due to their involvement in such a controversial and anomalous investigation. That's great. That sounds like what's going on with anyone that denies the climate change narrative.
Yeah, you just get canceled.
Yep. So this has been going on for a while, the cancellation of science.
Oh, absolutely. No question. I mean, this is all part of, the idea of paradigm shift. Thomas Kuhn coined the concept in science. And, basically one of the things that he described is it's like there's almost this like bottleneck effect that happens like right before, just as a new paradigm is being suggested that scientists have a very hard time to accept. And then they spend years, trying to fit everything into their already accepted box before things kind of like blow open and people are sort of forced to accept whatever the new paradigm is.
Yeah. And so in 1990, some scientists said, the Hueyatlaco site is not 250,000 years old. It has to be pre-Clovis because that's as old as we are now.
Assumption.
So guess what? Recently, a biostratigrapher in the 2000s went in there.
Mm-hmm.
And the evidence is piling up at the 250 date. Mm-hmm. His name is Sam Van Langden, and he published 2 peer-reviewed analyses confirming the earlier findings of 250,000 years before present. This was for the tool-bearing strata, and his 2004 analysis found that Hueyatlaco samples could be dated to the Sangamonian stage, which is 80,000 to 220,000 years before present due to diatoms, which they're not negotiable. They only existed when they existed.
Right.
And he found the diatoms which range this age, 80,000 to 220. This is more confirmation that this is a very old site.
Yeah.
And then a 2006 paper, he refined and confirmed the 2004 findings. It's crazy. So in 2008, and this is the end of it, at the Geologic Society of America conference, Joseph Lindencoat presented paleomagnetic research on the volcanic ash at Hueyatlaco. And some of the ash was dated to sometime after the Brunus-Matayama reversal 780,000 years ago.
Okay.
So that's another confirmation that it's younger than 780,000.
Well, yeah, sometime after 780,000 years before present. That's a pretty wide range as well.
I think they need to get an underdate on that.
Yes, that would be helpful.
So it's kind of interesting what's going on here at the site. It's like this is a story on what is happening in science as far as when you have new ideas or paradigm shifting information, it gets buried and they attack you. Just like Heinrich Svensmark is a perfect example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the cloud experiment and the fact that we know that it might have to do with the narrative the control. I mean, all of this is being controlled by some nefarious group. In the 90s, the national science, the science foundations were transferred over control to our governments.
Yeah.
And so all the funding, it was being determined by policy and not by science.
I mean, you can sort of see how this all ends up trickling down. And I just briefly, I just want to point out too that in this paper that you have up right now,
yes,
this raises the fact that and I don't know exactly what the reason is, but it sort of looks like perhaps there's been some amount of sabotage of the evidence as well. Like apparently there's a block of in situ evidence. So you have the tools next to the remains, like kept in situ. You take the whole block, you take it out. And someone at some point forcibly removed the artifacts from that block. And so they destroyed the evidence.
Huh.
And then there's all kinds of notations in here about the fact that Irwin Williams' original notes, I guess she didn't really publish, right? Irwin Williams is a she, that a lot of her notes and records, field records, are just like nowhere to be found. And so it's really unfortunate, I guess, that she didn't really publish. Maybe she did some publishing, but so, I mean, that's like what's going on there. But, you raised a really good point about our science foundations being government controlled, because once you do that, then you can kind of predetermine the narrative. The science foundations can then tell the academic institutions and the scientists effectively what kinds of narratives they should be coming up with. And then if you're, just kind of like a regular human without a huge amount of integrity, scientific or otherwise, then your whole path becomes about making some discovery in your career, devoting, decades to that work. And then if somebody then comes along and pokes a hole in your narrative, well, you're going to defend the hell out of all of the work that you've already done. So it's like, maybe without even realizing it, a lot of scientists are acting in a way just to defend their own careers, but effectively what's happening is that they are perpetrating whatever narrative the powers that be want to be put out there into the world. They may not realize that that's what they're doing, but that's part of the effect.
And in this paper, they confirm once again that the principal archaeological site could be older than 250,000 years old.
Yeah.
And the people that are saying it's 40,000 or 20,000 are lying.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So hopefully, and this site still exists, so people can go back out here and do more digging.
Well, and what really needs to happen is like somebody needs to not only re-examine the site, but somehow get a hold of whatever notes of Irwin Williams that are missing, like collect everything that's been missing here and do like a full-on analytical review, which sounds like it would be quite difficult to do, right? Because the information that's missing has been lost over decades. So like, who the hell knows where it is?
Well,
like,
and the stratigraphy is still there right here. You can go back and dig into the hill more.
Right.
Find more artifacts.
Right. Just confirm those dates again and again and again, using different methods in different places, using whatever artifacts that are in situ that are still there. And there's a whole list of, in this paper, there's a whole list of animal species that were found, in situ with the artifacts that helped with the dating. And a lot of these are extinct, so like there's clearly plenty of evidence to work with at this site.
Yeah, but the problem is a lot of these species could be as young as 20,000 years old. So that's why they throw that date in there.
Right.
But they also could be 280,000 years old.
Right.
That's why I think the diatom work is the narrowest time frame. That goes 280 to 80. That shows this is a very old site.
Yeah.
And has nothing to do with Clovis. Now, Clovis might have been here.
Sure.
But I think a different species of hominid was living in Puebla, Mexico, about 200. The dates all match up, right? The wooden structure in Zambia, isn't that where it was?
It was Zambia, I believe.
The occupation here in Mexico.
Zambia? Namibia?
I said Zamibia.
And you said it funny in our first show, so now I'm wondering, Zimbabwe? Was it in Zimbabwe?
Zambia. If that is even a place. And so we also have occupation at the same time in California.
Right.
So clearly, go ahead.
Well, and I think where you were going to mentioning that wooden structure, right, is one of the things that showed is that this was a different hominid species. It wasn't us.
Yeah, we don't have anything going back, I think, further than maybe 200,000.
Right.
150. Right. What's the date now? 180 for Homo sapien?
I don't know. But I mean, not only are we underselling ourselves, but we're also underselling all of the hominids that came before us. We just assume that they're like, dumb
hairy apes,
gatherers, cavemen, whatever. And, and we have all these like pictures, even the way that Neanderthals typically are like drawn. They're always drawn as some like dumb looking primitive sort of caveman type thing. And it's like, clearly they're much more capable than we give them credit for.
Yeah, they got up early. That was a great show. Thanks for watching, guys. We appreciate you.
See you tonight at 8 p.m. Magnetic Reversal News.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And we'll be right back after this message.